Now that I'm able to capture better quality video, I want to take a moment to update my Getting Started in Studio One series. The last one was done about a year ago, and that was for version 4. And I'm going to make this one a little bit different. We're going to look at 4.5, but as much as in the past, I've tried to explain things in a simple manner. When you've been working with music production or music production software for so long, you forget how daunting it all is for a complete beginner. If you imagine someone who just found out what a DAW is and has never heard of quantization, compression, bit depth, and so on, maybe they just bought a device and it came with Studio One and they are completely lost. So this time around, I'm going to make the Getting Started video a lot longer, and I'll be briefly explaining some of the technical terms as we go along. So I'm going to be keeping that individual in mind who's just found out what a DAW is, just found out about Studio One, and is feeling overwhelmed, and they open it up and they just can't get anything done. So if you're already somewhat familiar with Studio One, you're really not going to want to watch this video. It's going to be super simple, slowed down a bit, and a bit more relaxed than my normal tutorials. If you're completely new to working with a DAW or Studio One, then this is going to be for you. Lastly, you will see cards that are going to pop up in the upper right-hand corner here, and these are going to be at various points in the video, and they will take you to more in-depth tutorials on a particular topic that I'm discussing. So as much as I'm going to slow this down and make it more simplified than before, there's still concepts that there's going to be limitations of how long I can spend on them, because otherwise we'd have a 4-hour or an 8-hour video. We'd be here all day. So if I'm talking about a particular topic and you see a card pop up and you're not happy with the depth of the explanation that I gave in this video, just click on that link and it will take you to a more in-depth one. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started taking a look at Studio One 4.5. I'm working with the professional version. Now, once you launch Studio One, this is the page that you're going to see. It's called the Start page. And this is where we can begin a new song, to record our live instruments, to record our MIDI information, a mix of the two. We can mix our song to balance the levels between the different instruments. We also, in the professional version, have the project page, which will allow us to master. And we're not going to talk about that too much, because if you're just getting started, you're not going to be working with mastering. Now, the first thing you're going to need is audio. That's critical. I've got Windows Audio. In order for me to capture audio from Studio One in my screen capture program, I have to use this. Otherwise, I would have my audio interface. So you'll want to be sure that your audio interface is here. What that's going to do is give you less latency. So if you're using an external keyboard and you press a key, that signal has to pass into Studio One through your computer and then back out to your headphones. And there can be a delay if you're on a slower computer and you're using Windows Audio. And that's one of the things that the audio interface is going to help alleviate, is that delay, that latency. So the way that you can choose your audio interface is by clicking here or on Configure Audio Device. So if we click that, we have the options menu here, and it's taken to the Audio Setup tab. Now you can see your audio device that's currently active. As I said, I'm using the Windows Audio for the tutorial. If I click on that down arrow, you can see my Focusrite. I have a Scarlett Solo. If I'm working on something myself, this is what I would be using to get rid of the latency. It also allows me to connect an external mic that has an XLR cable, or that uses an XLR cable. It can also bring in MIDI from controllers. It can send out MIDI, and you should have better quality preamps on your audio interface. Now, by clicking on the control panel, you're going to access settings for your particular audio device, and what you see when you click on that is going to vary depending on the particular model or brand that you're working with. This is what shows up for the Windows Audio, and this is actually the latency that I'm working with here, or that delay from the time I may trigger to hearing it back or being recorded within Studio One. I'm going to close that for now. If you want to learn more about setting up your audio interface, just click up above there on the card. I will cancel out of this window for now. So that's how you can set up your audio. And at any time you want to access that options menu to make some adjustments there, you would Control, on the QWERTY keyboard, and that will bring that up. And you've got a general tab here where you can actually do some settings here, general settings. You can change the appearance of Studio One. There are some presets down below based on colors. So if you choose Blue Moon, Camouflage, and so on. So you can make those adjustments from the presets, or you can use these sliders up above to adjust the settings as you would like. I'm going to cancel out of there to take it back to as it was. I'll Control, comma again. We've got keyboard shortcuts, so you can set your own here. If you were to search for, say, record, and say you want to assign a key on your QWERTY keyboard to enter into record. By default, you can use the asterisk on the number keypad, but say you want to change that in here. Here's the transport, record. You can select that, and you can see the number pad asterisk here is the current default setting, but you can enter a key into here and then choose assign for whatever key commands that you want to set up. All right, and also down at the bottom, by default, we're going to be using the Studio One scheme, but you can click here and you can choose Cubase. If you're if you're new, you're not going to be coming from a DAW most likely, but if you are, you could choose Cubase, Logic, Pro Tools, Cakewalk, and these will use the key commands for those DAWs in Studio One. Okay, and I think that's maybe getting a bit ahead, more advanced, but we've got locations, and we'll take a closer look at that in a moment, audio setup, and our external devices. And this is where you can add your external controller. If you have a MIDI keyboard or a pad, 16 pad device, I'm actually using the Atom, and that has 16 pads on it. That's already set up here. If we come to the add, this is where you can add your controller. Now, there are different manufacturers here to the left, and so if you see yours here, you can choose that. So, for instance, if you have an MPK Mini, that's down here. You can select that and come to the receive from, and you'll see your MPK Mini pop up in this window if you have it connected. You can set it so that it's the default instrument input whenever you create an instrument track, and that will make more sense in a little bit. But yeah, if you've got a controller, just take a look here, and setting those up varies depending on the manufacturer. You may have software that came with it that you can install, and it will map it to Studio One. Maybe you don't, and you'll need to do it manually. If you need to do it manually, then you would come to New Keyboard, and then this is something else that you can take a look at the card up above to find out more information about. And then finally, we have an Advanced, and this is Advanced, so this is a beginner tutorial. We're not going to cover that at the moment. Let's come back to the General, and I'm going to cancel out. Now, from the Start page, everything begins here. We can create our new song by clicking here. We can create a new project, but that's for mastering, that's more advanced, or we can open an existing document, and this is going to take you to your Studio One folder, and then here you have songs. Your songs will be listed there. Now, to the left, we have recent files. Now, anything that you've been working with is going to pop up here. You can always right-click and choose to remove it from the file list if you'd like. You can choose to show it in the Explorer or the Finder on the Mac, and you can see the song here in the file path to get to it. We'll close that out. We can also see different versions, auto-save versions. We can come to the left here, and we have this pin icon that pops up, and if we'd like to keep that song hanging around in this field, as you continue to work, this is going to dynamically update, but if you'd like for something to stick around, just click on that pin there. Here we have an artist profile, and then you can click down at the bottom here and then name. Put your artist name if you have one, so that whenever you create a new song, I just clicked on that, you can see it's going to have your name there unless you rename it. Okay, you can put in a genre by clicking once. You can put in a website here if you have one. And then in the center area here, you can attach an image to your song file. So by clicking on the ellipsis here, then you can navigate. So if I were to come to my Quanta folder, web promotion, here's my little logo. If I open that up, then you can see it doesn't look right, but that could be adjusted. I'm going to click the X to get rid of that. If you have a SoundCloud and you'd like to link it directly with Studio One, then you can use this tab to do that, and just click here, and then that will allow you to connect your SoundCloud, and you can upload your completed songs to SoundLoad directly from within Studio One. Now to the right, we have a news feed. So we've got propaganda coming from Studio One here to the left. You can scroll through and see different sales that are happening, different products, and various things. We've got demos and tutorials here. So if you want to open up some songs that other artists have done and see what they've done to their songs, you can take a look here. There's some tutorials as well. Now at the bottom, you can check for updates to see that you are running the latest version. I'm all set there. And normally you'll receive a notification saying that there are updates available for Studio One, and you'll have the option to apply those or download them and install them. Now in the upper right hand corner, we have Start, Song, and Project. These are going to show whether you're working on the project page, whether you're working on the song page, or you're here on the start page. And we'll come back to these in a moment once we begin our song. So let's get to creating a song. The first step you want to do is click on Create a New Song, and we have this dialog here. Now on the left hand side, we have a variety of templates that you can choose from. So these are ones that PreSonus has created so that if you have different setups, say you're doing a band with, this will give you a template for a band. It has 16 tracks. Instrument set, this is going to load different instruments within Studio One. If you're recording a rock band, this is going to set up like 8 different inputs for your drum kit. It's going to set up a track for vocals, for guitar, and all of that's going to be done for you so that you can save time and get started. If you are working with a particular interface by PreSonus, say you bought that and it came with Studio One Artists, then you may be able to find your interface here. So the AudioBox USB is pretty popular. You can select this, and that's going to set up the ins and outs on that device for you. So you don't have to worry about setting up the routing. As long as you have your audio interface connected, just choose the one that you're using if it's by PreSonus, and then your ins and outs are going to be set up for you and ready to go. Now here, the final one is user. These are going to be user presets, and we can create a preset that's going to have everything loaded and set up that we would typically work with for our situation, and that will save us time getting started. If you'd like to see more about setting up templates, just click up above here. All right, we're just going to start with a basic empty song though. We're just going to start from scratch. We can name our song here. I'm going to call this First Song, and this is the file path where it's going to be saved. This is always going to be the same, and this is where we'll come back to the options menu. So I'll control comma. Let's come to the locations, user data, and this is where it's pulling that location from, whatever you set here. So currently mine is set to go to my desktop, my Quanta folder, and Studio One. If you'd like to change that location, just click on the ellipsis button there and set up whatever location you'd like for it to default to when you're creating a new song. Now let's come back to create a new song, and just know that, okay, so that's that location and it's always going to go there, but you can also choose to have this go wherever you'd like. So for this instance, I'm going to choose my desktop and select that folder. Now the song that we create in this tutorial is going to go directly to my desktop. Let's put in the first song again. Now here we have sample rate, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this tutorial, I'm going to take a brief moment to describe these things. So sample rate is basically going to determine the quality of the audio. CD quality is 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit resolution. So if you're familiar with the quality of a CD, that's what those settings are going to give you. 48 is a bit better. 24-bit is a bit better. And talking about these can be, we could spend a lot of time here, but just know that most people are going to set their resolution to 24-bit, and this is going to kind of determine the amplitude of your song, the dynamics of it. Again, this is going to determine the quality. And an important thing to keep in mind is that the higher your sample rate, so say if we were to go to 96 kilohertz, that's not available on the Windows Audio, but that's going to stress your processor more, and the difference you may hear may be negligible. We're not going to go there to talk about sample rates, the best one to use. I'm just going to say, for me personally, if I'm working on a song, I'll usually roll with 48 kilohertz and 24-bit. I would recommend spending some time as you progress in your music journey, doing more research on sample rate and resolution to determine where you'd like to be. But most people, you're going to probably find using 24-bit and 48 kilohertz or 96 kilohertz. If you're talking about a major studio, they're probably going to be doing 192. Now, by default, the song length is going to be set to 5 minutes, but don't worry about this, I'd say, because you can change that at any time you want. You can set the tempo for the song here, but again, we can change that at any time we'd like. You can set your time signature. I don't really change this that often. You can put in a key signature. And then here we have stretch audio files to song tempo. So when we actually get to our song, if you bring in loops or audio files that have tempo information, say you have a loop that was recorded at 120 or 140 beats per minute, if you bring it into your song and you want it to match up with your song, it's not going to if you deselect this. Of course, that's something we can change in the song, and we'll take a look at that once we get to the song. But this is just going to adjust the tempo of any loops and audio files that you bring in to match what you have set here. And again, we can always change this within the song, so don't stress too much about whether you should have this on or off. I'll typically leave it on. I wouldn't worry about the play overlaps either, so I think at this point we're all set. We've chosen the empty song for our template. Or to begin with, we've named it first song. We've chosen the desktop. We're going to work with 48 kilohertz and 24-bit. At this point, I'm going to click OK, and we're taken to the song page. And this is where all of the magic happens. And I'm just thinking here how to begin approaching this and I'm reminding myself that this is for a complete beginner to working with a DAW and music production in the box. And so with that in mind, I'll just say that the song page, this is the arrange view here in the center. This is going to contain your audio and your MIDI. So if you're going to be recording a vocal, it's going to be recorded in this view, and you're going to see it as a waveform. If you're going to be recording using an external MIDI controller, a keyboard, or some pads, the MIDI data from that device is going to show up here. And then in this way, you can arrange the parts, move them around as you'd like, and you can get even further into editing the individual MIDI notes, which we'll take a look at in the future in this video. Okay, so this center area is going to hold all of your audio and MIDI so that you can arrange it and access it for editing. Over to the left, we have a track column, and this is going to have all of your tracks, and we'll see that in a moment. Here you can select tracks for different recording. You can do different things. Here we have our browser where we can access our VST instruments. We can access our effects, our loops, files from our computer, and the cloud, and the pool. The pool is basically a repository for all of the audio that we've recorded or brought in to our song. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to see the start song and project wherever we are. If we wanted to come back to that start page, we could just click there. If we want to come back to our song, we'd go there. If we have multiple songs open at a time, then we can use this down arrow to choose from those songs. Up at the top, we have a variety of tools. By default, we're going to have the Smart Arrow tool that's active. This is our range tool, a knife or split tool for cutting up our audio and MIDI events. We'll see that. An eraser tool. This is a paint tool. And if we click on that down arrow, we can see there's a variety of different modes for the paint tool. These tie into the number keys on your QWERTY keyboard. So at the top, if I press 1, we have the Smart Arrow tool. 2 is the range tool, 3 the split tool, 4 erase, and so on, all the way through to 8 our listen tool. This is a bend tool for kind of manipulating the timing of our audio. Next to that, we can access some various features of Studio One that we may or may not get to in this tutorial. The Q is to access a more in-depth quantize panel, but this one is going to give you the quickest access to quantizing. And we are going to talk about what quantize is in just a moment. And then let's come down to the bottom, the transport. Transport controls, most important that you're going to need to know is that we have a stop button, a play button. We can enter into record by clicking that, or using the asterisk on your number keyboard, or you can assign whatever key you'd like, as I showed in the beginning of this tutorial. We have performance. So at the top, this one is going to show our CPU usage. The bottom one is going to show our disk usage. This MIDI here is going to show activity coming in. If I press the pads on my controller, you can see these light up. That's going to show you activity happening with the MIDI. And this could be a good place to look if you're having trouble getting your external controller to trigger the instruments. First, look here. If these are not lighting up when you're pressing your keys, then the MIDI is not reaching Studio One, and you'll want to take a look at your cables and the settings on your external controller. The most important one, when I press my pads, you can see both arrows are lighting up. The first one is the most important because that's the input coming in. The Atom can receive MIDI going out of Studio One to kind of light the pads up when I'm playing back, but that's not critical for recording. So don't just focus on the first one there. You should see activity there when you use your external controller. Okay, here we can see where our song position cursor is. We're on bar 3. If I press the decimal symbol on the numeric keypad, I return that cursor back to the beginning of the song, and you can see that that changes to show we are on bar 1. Here we can turn loop on, the loop function on, and we'll cover that in a little bit. Here, this is the volume of the master out. These are meters that are going to show the master out. You can see if you're clipping here, there's a box here. If it turns red, then you know you're clipping, and you don't want to bounce down your song if you've got clipping going on here. Now at the bottom, these, you may be using these a lot probably. We can access our browser by clicking there. The mix console, let me close out the browse by clicking there. And the editor by clicking here. Now these are all tied into function keys, which I prefer to use. The less I have to grab my mouse, the quicker I can work and stay in the zone when I'm working on a song. So F2 is going to give you the edit window. F3 is going to be the mix console. F4 is going to give you the inspector, which is going to give you detailed information about tracks once we get some of those in there. And F5 will bring up the browser. Now, let's move on to the browser, because this is kind of where everything begins, particularly if you're going to be working with VST instruments. If you're recording live instruments, then creating tracks is really going to be the first place you begin. So let's actually take a look at that. I'm going to F5 to close out the browser. So say you want to just go ahead and get started right away, and all you want to do, you don't care about all of this other stuff. You just want to record your vocal and a guitar. And you've got 2 mics. So you're going to need 2 tracks. So what I would do is press T on the QWERTY keyboard. We have the Add Tracks dialog here. Now, we can name our tracks. We can choose the type, and we want audio because we're going to record our vocal and guitar. The count, we can choose 2 if we want to add 2, but that's going to affect how those are named, and I want to name them individually to start with, so I'm going to just put 1. Let's start with 1 track. Let's just call this vocal for our vocal track, and it's going to automatically be assigned a color, the track. If you'd prefer to assign your own, just uncheck here and choose a different color. Maybe I'll choose this there. And the format is mono, which is good. Pretty much whatever you do, record live, is going to be in mono. And for beginners, I wouldn't worry about this down here. You can choose a particular input from your audio interface here. Since I'm on Windows Audio, it shows up as input L, input R, left and right. And at this point, let's just go ahead and click OK. Now, here we have a track ready to record our vocal. So let's add one more for our guitar. I'll call this guitar. It's set to audio. We have a count of 1. Let's set this to a different color. It's on mono, which is good. Input L. Maybe we'll want to use a second mic if we're going to be recording them at the same time. So we'll put that on input R. I'll choose OK. So now we have our two tracks. You could think of these as containers for our audio. As we start recording, you're going to see your audio here. You'll see a waveform to represent the sound that's being recorded. Now these are a little bit small. If you're only going to record vocal and guitar, you'll probably want to see these a bit larger. So what you can do is hover at the border, and you have these double arrows where you can drag and make that larger. You could also come down to the bottom where it says normal. You could choose large. You can also use shortcut keys by holding Shift and E to make these larger. Holding Shift and W is going to make them smaller. So Shift and E, I'll make these a little bit larger. So we've got our tracks set up for recording. Now the next most important thing you're going to want to do is be sure that they're armed for recording. So you can arm for recording by clicking on this white circle. And I'm going to deactivate the speaker so I won't get feedback. Or actually rather hear myself double in the headphones that I'm using. So in order to record the audio, these have to be red. It means that they're ready to record the incoming audio from your device, input left and input right that we chose when we were setting up the track. If you'd like to change these at any point, you can come here and choose input right. You could choose input left. So you can always change your inputs if you'd like to do that here. Now the purpose of these monitor buttons is some people would like to record with, say, a little bit of reverb on their vocal to help them get in the mood. And the monitor button is going to allow you to hear yourself with that reverb on it. So if that's the situation that you're in and you prefer to have a bit of reverb or some other effect and hear that back while you're recording, you'll want to be sure that monitoring is enabled. Otherwise, you're not going to hear yourself if you have headphones on. You could just not wear headphones and record directly into the mic and you'll see the waveform. But at this point, you should be able to record your guitar and vocal. You'll want to be sure that you have the meter here is not clipping, so you may want to play or sing the loudest passage of your song. Be sure that you're not getting a red clip here. So I'm trying to make it clip, but I'm not able to. So the only thing that you'd have to do right now is press the record button here. Studio One goes into recording, and then you can see it is capturing the audio, and this is the waveform that's showing up. I'm going to go ahead and stop. Now, of course, your waveforms are going to look different because one's going to be a vocal, one's going to be a guitar, but because I'm using the Windows Audio, you'll have to just bear with me. These are going to show up kind of the same for my vocals. Okay, now that we have our vocal and guitar recorded, I can hit this arrow here to come back to the beginning of the track, or you could use the decimal symbol on the numeric keypad if you have one. I'm going to use the space bar to go ahead and let's play these back. Studio One goes into recording, and then you can see it is capturing the audio. Okay, so it's as simple as that. As far as if you're recording a basic setup like that, you've got it done. Now at this point, you may want to do some mixing. You may want to apply some other effects. And we're going to take a look at that. But I do want to kind of backtrack just for a moment to show you so that this will make more sense for input L and input R. If I come to song setup, and then here to the right, audio input output setup. Now you can see I've got the Windows Audio, and these are kind of named that by default. If you want to set up your device so that it makes more sense to you, you can always double click here and then call this mic 1. Double click on the bottom one, call this mic 2. At the top, you could call this stereo in, and that's just using mic 1 and mic 2, but they're both combined. And you can see the meters for the activity here. So you can rename them and they will make more sense. And if it's going to be a setup that you're using all the time, you can use the make default and you don't have to, worry about setting up your inputs and outputs or anything like that on a regular basis. But the names will always be retained whenever you create a new song. These names will be there. And these just make more sense than input L and input R. So if your input interface is a 2 input and it's got 2 mic inputs, this would just represent those. So I'm going to choose OK. And then now you can see that this is updated, mic 1 and mic 2. That makes much more sense, right? And then here you can see, and I hope this makes more sense now that these have been renamed, and you know how you can get that done. One other thing that I'd like to mention is if I F3 to open up the mix console, we can see these are called channels within the mix console, and these are tracks. So the tracks actually contain our audio. The channels just route our audio to the master output. And it's here where we can add effects to the recordings that we've done, or we can add them like a reverb if we want to hear that while we're recording. But what initially brought me here was I wanted to show that to the left here we have inputs. You can see, monitor the levels of your audio interface here. And you can be sure that you're coming in at a good level. This actually may even be a bit too hot. I would say in the digital world, you don't have to worry about having the loudest signals as you did in the analog. We don't have to worry about noise as much. So for me, if it's falling somewhere between 24 and 12 here, then I feel like that's a good signal for me. At the top, we can adjust gain and phasing, but as a beginner, you're probably not going to want to worry about that. But by clicking on the inputs here, we can access that to see the levels. And so one of the important things about the mix console and why you'd want to make use of it is if your, say, guitar is too quiet or your vocal is too loud, then you can make the adjustments here and then balance between the two. But for now, let's F3 to close out the mix console and come back to our arrange view. And I'm going to click, hold, and drag to delete these out. And now we're going to take a look at, well, what if you want to record your vocal with an effect like reverb on it? One thing that we can do is press F4 to open up the inspector. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to give you more detailed information about the particular track that you have selected. So I've got the vocal track selected. We can see vocal here. This is different aspects of the track. And we can even see a channel here for that track, which is the same thing as the channel in the mix console. If I select the guitar, we can see the color changes and we have guitar at the top. But we'd like to add some reverb and hear that back while we're recording our vocal. So here at the bottom, we have inserts. You would click on that plus symbol and let's just come to the PreSonus. If you're just beginning, you probably don't have third-party effects, so the ones that are included with PreSonus are just fine. I'm going to choose the Room Reverb. Okay, and this is a reverb effect device, a plugin, and it is basically going to add reverb to your recorded audio or to the audio that's coming in. Both, it does the same thing. Okay, now you probably want something subtle if you're recording your vocal, but I'm actually going to choose something a bit more extreme, just so it will be apparent what this is doing. But we've got this room reverb on our vocal track. You can see it listed here. You can always power it on and off by clicking this button or by clicking this button here. But if I were to click on the monitor button and hear myself back, there would now be a reverb attached to it. I'm going to go ahead and activate it. Hopefully this is not going to mess me up. But you can hear the reverb. I think it's recording the screen capture. But it's hard to talk with the delay. And that's where the latency issue comes in that I was talking about. I hope that delay is making it in. Probably isn't. But if I control comma and then come to the audio setup, the Windows audio, the latency is showing here. And if I come to the control panel, you can see latency in milliseconds. If I were using the Focusrite, this would be way down lower and I wouldn't have the delay, which makes it impossible to record anything. Anyway, I'll cancel out. And I'm going to F4 to close out the inspector. You can always press the I here to access it. And I'm going to close out the reverb. We don't need that open to be active. It's just going to be active. And then let's start from the beginning. I'm going to enter into record. And then now the reverb is going to be recorded on this vocal track. I'll go ahead and stop. Let's come back to the beginning of our song. And I'm going to mute the guitar because we just want to hear the reverb on the vocal. And then now the reverb is going to be recorded on this vocal track. Okay, so you can hear that very obviously. And it actually hasn't been recorded or printed onto the audio. It's working in real time, which does take up processing power. Depending on the machine you are, if you have a lot of effects that are running in real time, you may want to bounce those down to audio. And we'll get to that. But let's come back to the inspector. And if I turn off the room reverb and play that back. And then now the reverb is going to be recorded on. You can hear that it's off. So you're not stuck with the reverb on your vocal. If you want to use it in this manner, you can just use it, to, as I said, to help kind of get you in the mood while you're recording your vocals and make you feel more relaxed. I'm going to click the I to close out the inspector. And just be aware that if we come to the mix console and open up the inputs panel again, these represent the inputs from our audio device, right? But if I click on the plus symbol and then add the room reverb, it's got to be right in front of me. Okay. These are in alphabetical order. Get it together. All right. If you were to put it on the insert here, then it's going to be recorded and mixed in with this waveform. You're not going to be able to get rid of it. So typically you're not going to want to add anything here. Some people like to record with compression or things like that. But as a beginner, you don't want to particularly add effects to your inserts here because it's going to be stuck on the audio. You won't be able to get rid of it. So anytime you'd like to remove an effect, we can right click on it and remove. Okay, and that applies to the inspector as well. Clicking once is going to show you some an overview of some controls there. But if I right click, we can remove, and the reverb is gone there. I'm going to click on the I to close out our inspector. And I also just want to briefly cover, before we move on, that you can add effects from the browser as well. So if we click on Browse and at the bottom, we have an Effects tab. If I click on that, then we can see all of our effects. Here, the PreSonus. And then we have these thumbnail images. If we come down to the bottom, We can see this is our room reverb. And so the other way that we can add this is by clicking and dragging it onto the track. And this can be an even simpler way to get that done. I'll close it out. I'll close out the browser. And if we take a look at the inspector here, you can see the room reverb is there, just as if we added it from the plus symbol. Okay, and there is one other area that we can add effects, and that would be in the mix console. So if I click on the mix button, let's close out that inputs. Here is our vocal. Now, depending on the view that you have chosen for the mix console, these buttons here, we have a small and large and narrow and normal. If I put this on small, well, first let's look at this here. We can see the room reverb up top. This is similar to the view in the inspector. Okay. So we can click on the plus symbol and access effects here. So if I put a course on there, here's our course device. And then now that's been added as another effect along with our reverb. By clicking on this border, we can expand out the mix console even larger and see more of what's going on. If we'd like to power down either one, as we saw in the inspector, we can do that as well. We can click on the down arrow to remove. We can also right click and remove. If you've got a group of effects and you'd just like to turn them all off but not remove them, you can click on the power button up above, and that's going to power all of the effects off. Now let's pull this back down to be more as it was. There's one other place that they can be added, and this has to do with the mix console being in a small mode. So when we click on these arrows facing each other, we go into the small mode. And the purpose of this is we can see more of what's going on in our arranged view. And then once we come to the small mode, we have these buttons that show up. And this is going to allow us to access the inserts panel. And then we can see even more clearly our inserts and sends here. We've got the same plus button that we've seen in the inspector. And we can add effects like so. I'm going to click to add one more just to show that you don't need to, we can double click on these to open up the individual effects, but while this is open up top here, we can also just click to see the flanger, the room reverb, our fat channel. They can also be accessed up above here. And just remember, we can power them on and off here as well, the individual ones. We can also click on the down arrow to remove here. Okay, and you can see that that's gone from our mix console. The fat channel, we'll remove that. It's gone here. Okay, so just remember, these buttons are going to pop up if you happen to be in small mode. Just remember that there, when I go back to large mode, you can see they're gone because our inserts and sends are now up above our channel. Okay, so at this point, I think we should probably wrap up as far as recording live instruments, live vocals. That should be a basic introduction to get you going. After, you can watch this a couple of times, this portion of the video, and by following along, you should be able to get yourself set up and recording in 30 minutes or so. So now let's move on to working with VST instruments and MIDI. Okay, so now that we have a grasp on how we can go about recording live instruments and vocals, how can we go about working with the VST instruments and MIDI? That's what we're going to take a look at in this portion of the video. So what I'm going to do is press F6 to be taken directly to the Instruments tab within the browser. And it's here that you're going to find all of the PreSonus VST instruments as well as any third party that you install. But we're just going to focus on the PreSonus ones here. So I'm going to click and expand that out. Now, one of the first things that we'll probably want to do is lay down some drums. So Impact is going to be perfect for that. And any instrument that we'd like to work with, we would simply click, hold, and drag from the browser into our arrange view. And now we have our impact loaded up. So let's close down the browser. And this is going to be empty by default. We don't have any kits loaded. So if I trigger with my controller, we could see the pads light up, but there's no sound produced because MIDI does not produce information or sound. MIDI does not produce audio. It only triggers audio within the DAW. So, I think that's one thing that may be confusing for some folks. And I'm going to pull this to the side and let's open up this MIDI monitor. When I press a pad on my controller, this is the information that it's sending out. It's not audio. It's information like note on. So note C, note on, note off. So MIDI essentially tells Studio One what to do. It says which note to play or which pad, how long, when to release, how hard or soft it should be played, the velocity. So just think of MIDI in that way. It doesn't have any audio at all. So we'll close off that MIDI monitor and we need to get a kit loaded so we can have some sound. We can access the different kits up above here where it says default. Click on that down arrow. Then we can choose any kit that we'd like. I'm going to choose this Cosmic Chill. That's then loaded up. Now when I use my controller, we can hear the samples being played back based on the MIDI information that's coming in from my controller. Now there's several different ways that you can go about laying your drums down within Studio One or most DAWs. You can play them live using your controller. You can set up a loop and just have it loop back, and you can record one sound at a time, or you can play the pads multiple sounds at a time. You can draw the notes in the drum editor, or you can use the new patterns feature that was included in the 4.5 update, I believe. So first we'll look at recording them live, which is the method that I actually would recommend and prefer to use. Actually, I use a mix of recording some of the bass drums. Bass, I mean B-A-S-E, like setting the foundation, the kick, the snare, a couple of the hats maybe, and then I'll add in some percussion elements manually. So I tend to use a mix of the two, but we're going to first take a look at recording them live. We've got our sounds loaded into Impact, so I actually don't need to see this right now. And our tempo is at 120, if you remember that. If we'd like to work with a different tempo, we can click once and just manually enter in a value. We can also click on the tempo repeatedly. If we have, say, a rhythm in our head, we can 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can click on that and set a tempo, say if we had that speed set in our head. And then now, this is our click track to make that active, this button here. So when that's blue, our click track is going to be active. If I press the space bar, then we can hear that kind of rhythm that I was tapping in with the tempo, and that's 162. So one thing that you could do is play it back and then trigger the sounds with your controller to come up with a beat that you would like to record. So and actually I'm going to change the kit on that. So anytime you'd like to access your VST instruments on the instrument track, you can click this icon here. You can also use Shift F11 on your QWERTY keyboard. On the Atom, I actually have a show hide that I can press to bring that up if I'd like. But I'm going to change this kit to maybe this one here. Yeah, this is a little bit less spaced out. So again, I'll close that out. Let's return to the beginning of the track by pressing the decimal symbol on my numeric keypad. I'm going to press the space bar to begin playback and just play around with some ideas really quickly. Okay, so we'll just keep it very simple. And if you remember, I'm using the Windows Audio, which is going to have some latency here. And that's one of the important reasons why you'll want to use an audio interface, because when I'm triggering the pads, from when I'm hearing the click track and kind of trying to keep up with that click track, there's going to be some latency. So my playing is going to be a little bit off. And actually, I'm going to use the input quantize, this IQ up at the top. If we activate that, then Studio One's going to automatically quantize the MIDI notes that are being played to the tempo and the grid, whatever you have this set to. And I'm going to set this to 16th notes. And since this is for beginners, if you're not familiar with quantize, essentially what it does is it kind of locks the notes and what you're playing to the grid so that the timing is going to be correct. And I normally don't use quantize on my drums. Depending on what sort of music you're doing, you may or may not want to use it. But since I'm working with the Windows Audio and I have some latency going on, I'm going to give this a shot and see if this will help correct the timing issues that I'm sure I'm going to experience here. Okay, so now I'm going to enter into record and see if I can get this laid down live. Press the space bar to stop. And then now we have something similar to what we saw with the audio, where we have this event, which is a MIDI event, whereas the audio is stored in an audio event. And we can see that MIDI information here. And this is the note on and note off information that we took a look at in the MIDI monitor here. And if I double click on this, we open up the editor, then we can see the individual MIDI notes, and we can move these to wherever we like. And actually, I know that that note was a bit off because usually the snare, from what the pattern I was playing with the controller, they're going to want to fall on 2.3, 3.3, 4.3, and so on. So you can see these are off. So the input quantize setting was not really the right one. So I probably would want to experiment with something different. But let's go ahead and play it back. It's going to sound kind of bad, but... And so instead of manually adjusting these so the timing is right, what I'm going to do is just press Control A to select all of those MIDI notes. I'm going to change the quantize to the nearest quarter note, I think is what I want to do. I'll press Q. You can see that those moved. It may have made it worse or better. Let's give it a shot. I think I want to add another kick there. So we can add the notes here within the editor. By pressing F2, we open up the editor, or double clicking as I did on the MIDI event. We can also click the edit as long as we have something selected. So that's another way we can, as I was mentioning with programming them in manually, by double clicking, you can add these in. Okay, so you can see that. I'm just going to select those and delete those out for now. And I'm going to F2 to close out the editor. And let's come to the left edge of this MIDI part and bring that in because we don't have any MIDI information there. We only need this portion. And I'd also like to make this into a loop so I can continue to build it out. So a simple way to set your loop markers, well, first of all, they're kind of hidden when you first create your song. But if you hover here, we have these double arrows, and that way you can adjust their position. These are where they're positioned at, so that they're at the beginning of bar 1. If I click hold and drag, then I can set them to be wherever I'd like. And then in the transport bar, we have this loop to activate. A simple way to set it to a particular MIDI part, if you'd like, or audio event, would be to highlight that event, be sure that it's selected, and press P on the QWERTY keyboard. Then our loop is going to be here. And when I play back, it's just going to keep cycling over and over. And then you can hear back your basic kick and snare. And then while it's playing back, you can play around with different ideas, different percussion elements. And then once you've found what you like, just enter into record and then record that part. So if I play this back, so we're just going to record that. We're creating the worst beat ever, but that's all right. I'll exit record. And as you can hear, there's some timing issues because, again, I'm using Windows Audio with latency. And if you're stuck on Windows Audio, you know, one thing that I could have done is Control comma to bring up the options menu. And on the audio setup here, if I'd like the timing to be a little bit better, I can come to the control panel for Windows and take this down a bit. And that's going to tax your processor more, but the sounds will be triggered more in time with what you're doing. Okay. And I'm actually going to take that back up because otherwise I'm going to start getting that spiking there. So let's come back up to, also you could use exclusive mode, which should take care of that spiking, but exclusive mode will, in that way I can't capture the audio from Studio One because it's not going to allow it to be captured by my screen capture software. All right. So we've got that down to 30 instead of 40. We're not spiking there, so okay. Now let's play this back and hear that timing that's off on the hats. If you press 1 on the numeric keypad, that's going to take you to the beginning of your loop section. If you press 2, that takes you back to the end. So those are some useful shortcuts when you're working in this manner. Let's play it back and hear how it sounds. Okay, so it's kind of ahead. You can see that they're just away from the quarter note subdivisions. So what I'm going to do is just select all of these, and I'm going to press Q to quantize those. Now they're more in line. There's one that's kind of coming off, so I'm going to, there we go. Actually, I don't think I even want that one in there. Now I'll press 1 to come to the beginning of the loop. Let's play back using the space bar. That's a bit early, so we can move that. Now, if you notice this jumping, it's because it's set to follow here. We can disable that function, the jumping. Normally that could be useful. Sometimes it could be a pain. If you don't want it to do that, just disable the auto scroll there or press F on your QWERTY keyboard. But this last open hat was off. I'll press 1 to come back to the beginning, and now we should be set. I'm going to press F so that it follows along again. That one's off. Okay, so I just corrected that one. And if you notice, these are snapping because our snap is on with this here. If you press N on the QWERTY keyboard, it will turn it off, or you could just click. So when it's active, your MIDI notes are going to snap to what you have the setting to here. It's on quarter notes. if we were to change that to eighth notes, then it's going to snap to the eighth notes. And then if we turn it off, you can move it freely wherever you'd like. And if I manually enter notes, I will do it with the snap off because I don't want everything to be so rigid. That's just my own personal taste. You can experiment with that and see what your preference is. But I just feel like when everything is not so strictly quantized, there's more life in the beat. And that fits my style of music and what I'm creating. If you're doing something like EDM or techno, then you may want that tight pattern. And in that case, you can leave the snap on. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and leave it off. And I'm not even going to put that directly on this grid line here. Okay, so we've got a basic kind of a sucky beat that we've done. You've seen how you can do that by recording it live. You've also seen how you can add them in and remove them. Another method that you can use to create your drum patterns is by using pattern. So if I set the song position cursor here at bar 13, I'm going to Control Shift P, and then this creates a pattern which is a 1 bar long, and it looks exactly the same as this, but when we double click on this MIDI part, then we're taken to the drum editor because we're working with Impact. When we double click on a pattern, that's going to open the pattern editor. And then here, this is going to be similar to something like FL Studio, the pattern there. We've got 16 different steps, and then with this, you can program your drums in by the step method. So we've got our bass drum. If I just add these in, where's our snare? And then let's be sure that this is highlighted. I'll press P to set our loop there, and let's play that back. Okay, this is our hat. We can click and drag those in. We can change the resolution here. So if we want to do just eighth, okay, and then just click, hold, and drag to get rid of them. If we set these to quarter, okay, so you got individual resolution controls for the different sounds here, and you've got global resolution controls up above. So we can even change the steps from 16 to, say, 32, doubling that and increase the length of our pattern. And I'm going to change that back to 16. Now, if we have this eye, which is the inspector for the pattern inspector, it's similar to the inspector in the arrange view, but whereas this is going to give you information about the particular track that you're working with, as we saw in the beginning of this tutorial, this one here is going to allow you to create variations. And so if I say this variation one, I'd like to add some hats, but I want to keep this more basic one also. The center will allow you to duplicate. So we have variation 2, and I'm actually going to change the hats back to the quarter note resolution, draw those in. So now we have our variation 1 that doesn't have the hats. The variation 2 does have the hats. So what does that mean? In our song up above, while this is highlighted, if I click once, I'll press D to duplicate that pattern. Then I'm going to drag the loop marker towards the end of that. And at the bottom here, we can choose which pattern we want to play back. Variation 2 is there. This one, we'll change that to variation 1. So now when we play this back, I'll press 1 to come to the beginning of our loop, spacebar to play back. Okay, so this is how you can go out and build your drum track out and create different variations, and then you can just simply choose whichever one you want to play by clicking here. So I could even add a completely new variation here. Where's our snare? I'm going to select this, press D to duplicate that out. Let's move this out, and let's make this one the variation 3, which it is. That's 2, and then we want this one to be 1, and that is 1. So let's play that back. Okay, so you can see how that works and how you can go ahead and build these out. And that is working with the patterns. And if you see here, you have a list of all of the different pads that are included within the impact. So let's go ahead and open up the impact, and let's pull that to the right a bit. So you can see this first one here, bass drum 1 matches there, bass drum 2, bass drum 3, and so on. Now, if you had created a kit by yourself, you could always use the wrench icon here, double click, and rename, press enter, and this has changed the name here in our patterns editor and also on the pad itself here. Still the same sound, but we can rename these to be whatever we'd like. Let's close out the impact and the editor. So let's come back to our original recording of the drums. I'm going to just click, hold, and drag to select those and press delete. Click once to select this. I'll press P to set our loop there. And just know that I've got a very in-depth tutorial on impact, so just be sure to check that out if you want to know more. But just quickly know that you can adjust the pitch of your sounds. There, you can transpose in semitones. We can add a filter if we'd like. And you've got a variety of filters to choose from here. We've got envelopes for the pitch, envelopes for the filter. We've got our amp. We can choose the gain, we can pan. And we've got an envelope for our gain and velocity control. Also, if you would like to add your own sounds, you can simply click, hold, and drag from the browser. So if I come to the file section, we can see our system directory here. So if I come to the desktop, my sounds are in the Quanta folder, sounds and samples. And we can even, once we've located where we have our sounds, if you have a folder with sounds that you've downloaded from online, we can right click and choose new tab from here. Then that's going to take you directly there. So if I come to files, this is where I navigated to that folder. Okay, so now when I come to the browser, I want to get to my sounds. I'll come to files, click directly on sounds and samples. And then here I have all of the folders with sounds in that sounds and samples folder. All right, so here we've got drum sounds. We can audition by using the play button. It's going to loop while we have that. If we take that off, it won't loop. This here is going to make the loop playback or the sound playback at the song tempo. So you can audition and hear how they're going to sound in your song real time. Now, drum sounds, that's not really going to work with because they're just one shots. But if you were working with loops, it will pitch up or down so you can listen back and audition to the same tempo that your song is in, 162. But if you wanted to add your own sounds, say we wanted to add this kick, we could just simply click, hold, and drag it to our pad. So if we wanted to add that one, just click, hold, and drag. And so now we've got those new sounds added into our impact. And you can go to the default, which will clear the pads, and then just load every one up that you'd like yourself and make use of all of the banks that you'd like. Okay, now let's go ahead and take a look at a different instrument. I'll come to the Browse and the Instrument tab. Let's bring in a MyTie here. Pull that there and close out our browser. We can choose different sounds for the MyTie by clicking here, just as we did in the Impact. So if I come to the lead folder, let's select this guy here, and I'm going to use my controller to trigger. Okay, let's say we wanted to add that to our basic beat that we have going on here. I'll come back to the beginning of the song. And as we did with the drums, we can always play back, and this is going to loop, and you can experiment with different melodies. This is actually how I work with my melodies in Studio One. I don't use any other sort of device. I'll just play it back and try out different melodies and see which sounds best to my ear. So since the drums kind of suck, I'm not going to try to come up with a nice melody, but you'll just see, you'll get the idea. Okay, so I started kind of late there when I was trying to enter into record, but we can easily fix that. You can do another pass through, just simply select the device, the MIDI part and delete it. I'll Control Z to bring that back. But as we saw with the drums, we can simply double click to open up the editor, and we can manipulate these notes as we manipulated the drum notes. So if I come to the edge here, we have the double arrows. I can drag that out. These will also snap if you have snap on. Right now it's off. I'll turn that on. Quantize is set to eighth notes. We've got our eighth note subdivisions. So now when I drag, you can see that snapping by eighth note. Okay, but that has been corrected. So when I play back, and actually, I like that new sound that I brought in on the open hi-hat. It's not as cheesy sounding. But anyway, these notes can also be added in as we did with the drum sound. So if I double click and then add that, we can drag that out. But the synth is in monophonic mode right now, so we're only going to hear one. But just know that you can come in and add notes to your heart's content. And drag those to the length that you'd like to be. Let's actually take the synth out of monophonic mode. So we'll access it by clicking here. Then we can see voices is set to 1. Let's take it off of mono. Now we can play 8 voices. We can always change that just by clicking and putting a value. So we should now hear those extra notes that we added in. Whether they sound good or not is something else. Okay. So now you can see how you can go about just selecting a MIDI part, pressing D to duplicate. I'm going to press W to zoom out a bit. So we can continue to press D, then we can come in, make some variations to our recording, or we could record them live. We can do the same with our MyTie. I'll press D on the QWERTY keyboard to duplicate these out. We could also just take the loop off and record a whole passage if you're a good keyboard player, unlike myself. But at any point you can come into any one of these and then make adjustments to the notes. I'll F2 to close out that editor, And we could continue on with this process by coming to the browser. We could choose, say, the presence here. And once you click, it expands out the presets. So if I wanted to say add a piano, we could choose the Pop Grand, drag that in. Let's close the browser and come to the beginning of our song. I'm going to play back. I'll enter into record. Stop playback. Okay, so now we have a little piano melody or whatever you'd like to call it. I'm going to turn the reverb on that to make it just sound a little bit better. So let's play that back and hear how it sounds. Taking the synth down in level here in our mix console. We can bring up our instrument by clicking here. I'm going to take the reverb up. Okay, so you get the idea how you can go about building this out. Again, we could press D while this is selected and keep recreating that. Or if you're a good player, you can just take the loop off up above and record an entire passage and have more movement with the piano part while keeping these a little bit more basic and repetitive if that's the sort of style that you're going for. Okay, so at this point, we've taken a look at how we can go about recording live instruments and vocals. We've taken a look at creating drum parts by playing them live, and we've also seen how we can program those in, either using the drum editor or the patterns. We've laid down a synth part, we've included some piano, we've seen how we can duplicate these parts and keep adding on. And just know that the effects are going to work the same way with our the VSTs as it did with the audio. So if I open up the MyTi and turn off the reverb here, and I'll close that back out, let's come to the browse and the effects and expand out our PreSonus. Where's the room reverb? We can click, hold, and drag that onto our instrument track that has the piano. And let's put this on something that's going to be very obvious, the Cathedral. So now when I play back, I kind of flubbed right there. And we could always fix that too by double clicking. You can see this is kind of where that error is, but you could always re-record, which is what I'd recommend, or you can adjust the notes here to correct. I'll F2 and close out that editor. But you can see we can simply drag and add effects to our MIDI devices as well, and these will be processed in real time. If you would like to render down a track to audio, just select the one that you'd like to render down, take the piano here, right-click, and here we have an option to transform to audio track. So if I select that, we have a few options. We can render the inserts, and that would be the reverb that I added. So I do want to keep that. This is going to allow us to come back to the state that it's in now, where we have the MIDI. If you leave this checked, this will remove the instrument and save the power draw on the processor or processor use. But as long as you leave this checked, you'll be able to bring it back. Auto tail, we put some reverb on the piano, so let's go ahead and include a bit of time at the end to include the trail off of our audio. I don't think we need 30 seconds. Let's just do 10, and then we'll click OK. Studio One's has done its thing, and this doesn't look entirely right. So it's because it's rendering down the separate MIDI parts each instead of one. So let me Control Z, and let's right click, and I want to group these. So under events we should see merge events. We could also press G on the QWERTY keyboard. Now these are all as one. So when I transform to audio track, those are all set. And I still did something wrong, but you can see this is how you can convert it to audio. We now have an audio waveform, and you can see the original MIDI data here, letting you know that you can transform it back to its original state. Transform to instrument track is what that will do. Let me just play this back. Okay, so that's how you can go about. Now the piano VST is gone now, and that's going to save processing power. But as I mentioned, we can always bring that back by transform to instrument track, and then now we're back to as we were. Okay, and so I did something wrong when I was grouping these. You can tell by this highlighted center area, but we're not going to worry about that from now. You get the idea. And I'm going to begin to wrap up here. This has gotten incredibly long, but you can always watch this in pieces and parts. But my goal was to take you from the beginning of not knowing what the hell to do to at least being able to record multiple tracks and even create a song, you know, that you can render down as an audio file. And before I forget, the way that you would do that is you want to set your loop markers to the portion of the song or the song that you want to render down. This is our song, if you'll call it that. Up at the top, under Song, we have Export Mixdown. You'll click there. Here is the location where it will be saved at. So if you wanted to save that to your desktop, you could choose Desktop, select that. That's where it will go. You can name it First Song is what we had called it. Published, you can choose whether you want it to go to your SoundCloud or send it to Notion. The format is down below. If you want to do WAV, 16-bit, 44.1 would be CD quality. You could also do MP3 file, and you can choose the bit rate. 64 would be pretty crappy. 256 and above would be better. So between loop is the export range, and that's why we set our loop to cover all of those parts. And then you would just click OK, and it's going to render that down. I'm going to go ahead and cancel for the purposes of this video, though. Now, there's still a hell of a lot more to talk about with Studio One, but you should, like I said, be able to create a basic song. You should be able to apply effects. You've seen how you can adjust the volume levels between the instruments to get a better match for what you'd like to hear. And the last couple things that I'll talk about are up at the top. We have some tools. This split tool is going to allow you to cut different MIDI parts. If I come back to the arrow tool and double click, actually I want to double click on this here. Now when we're in the editor, the split tool is here. We can use that to cut our notes. We have an erase tool, and we can use that to erase notes. If we're working in the arrange view, we can use the erase tool to erase parts. We've got a mute tool, so we can mute parts, mute and unmute. We have the bend tool, which is beyond the scope of this tutorial. We have a listen tool. So while this is active, wherever I click, it will begin playing back. The particular track that you are clicking on. So if you just want to hear the drums playing from here, if you want to hear the piano playing from here, okay, that's the listen tool. We've got a paint tool, which is going to be a bit more useful, I'd say, in the editor. So let's double click. The tools for the editor are here. When you're in the range view, you want to use up here. But if we change to the paint tool, we can draw in like so. Before we were using the arrow tool to double click. And when you double click, it's going to add them in to whatever you have the quantize value set to. So if I change that to half note, it's going to draw in a half note. We can always click, hold, and drag to select notes and press delete to remove any that we don't want, along with double clicking to remove them as well. At the very bottom, we have velocity information for the individual notes, and if we click, we can determine how loud or soft they're going to play back. So if we've recorded a passage that we're really in love with, but there's one note that's just too loud, then you can just come here and take it down. Okay, so I really think we're going to wrap up here. This is incredibly long, but I hope it's been useful or going to be useful for you guys. We'll call it quits here. If you made it all the way through, that's impressive. But if you're going to break it up into parts, that's also awesome too. So if there's any questions that you have, go ahead and leave a comment below. I will get back to you with an answer. And thanks for sticking through and checking out the video. Take care, guys.